I never used to believe in second chances. After my wife and boy died 3 winters back, I figured life had already given me everything worth having, then ripped it away just to prove a point. Most days I worked the ranch like a machine mending. Fences, doctoring cattle, riding the same trails till the dust felt like it lived in my bones. Nights were worse. The house was too quiet, and the silence would claw at me until I poured myself into a bottle. Folks in town said I kept to myself, but truth was, I didn't have anyone left to keep close. That morning by Miller's Creek felt no different. The sun was barely up, the water running fast with spring melt, and I rode along half asleep, just trying to keep my mind numb. That's when I saw a burlap sack snagged on a low branch, twisting and jerking in the current. At first I thought it was nothing but trash from the mining camp upstream, but then it moved. Not just the sack, the thing inside it moved. I pulled my horse hard, heart hammering, and scrambled down the bank. The rope was half submerged, and the sack was heavy. When I dragged it onto the rocks, I fumbled with the knot, fingers clumsy, cursing under my breath. Then I heard it faint, broken, but real. A cry, a baby's cry. When the burlap fell open, I swear the world stopped spinning. Inside was a little girl, her skin pale blue from the cold, lips quivering as if she'd already fought death and was slipping fast. She couldn't have been more than a few days old. My throat locked. I couldn't breathe. All I saw was my own son's face. The morning fever took him, eyes wide, chest still. For a second I froze. Part of me wanted to shut that sack again, shove it back into the creek, and walk away before the weight crushed me. I wasn't fit to hold another child, not after failing the ones God gave me. But when her tiny hand curled weakly around my thumb, the dam inside me cracked. Grief and terror, and something I hadn't felt in years hope hit all at once. I wrapped her in my coat, pressed her close to my chest, and kicked my horse into a gallop. The nearest doctor was 20 minutes hard ride into town, and I prayed, with every pounding hoofbeat, that I wasn't already too late. "Hold on, little one," I muttered again and again, half to her, half to myself. "Don't you leave me, too." The wind tore my eyes raw, the road blurred, but I didn't stop. My life had been ashes for so long, I forgot what it meant to burn for something. But with that child in my arms, clinging to a thread of life, I felt it again. I would not let her go, not like I lost the other's Dot by the time I saw the white steeple of the town's church rising above the rooftops. Her breathing had grown shallow, barely there. Fear nearly buckled me. I shouted hoarse as I rode down Main Street. "Doc, somebody get Doc Stone." Folks spilled from the shops, startled, as I swung down with the bundle in my arms. The weight was small, but it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I pushed through the swinging doors of the doctor's office, slamming them open with my shoulder. "She's dying, Doc," I gasped, laying the baby on the table. "Found her in the creek, in a sack." My voice broke. "Please don't let her die." For the first time since burying my family, I begged out loud. Not to God, not to the world, just to anyone who could hear. Dr. Michael Stone was already pulling his sleeves up when I laid her down. He didn't waste words, just leaned close, pressing 2 fingers to her chest. His face went pale. "Cold as the creek," he muttered, grabbing blankets from a shelf and wrapping her tight. He set a kettle on the stove, barked for hot water, and then started rubbing her little arms and legs with steady, practiced hands. I hovered useless, pacing, clenching my fists so tight the scars across my knuckles split open again. My whole body was trembling, and I didn't know if it was rage or fear. I'd seen calves born half dead and nursed back, but this was different. This was a child someone had thrown away like garbage. "Stay with us, sweetheart," Stone murmured, almost like a prayer. He held a glass dropper to her lips, coaxing her with sugared water. For a moment nothing happened, and I thought my heart would cave in. Then she swallowed weakly, and her tiny chest shuddered as if the world itself had jolted her back. The door creaked behind me. I turned, ready to curse whoever dared interrupt, and froze. Grace Harper stood there, the schoolteacher. Her hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, though her face looked hollow, like someone had scraped the life from her. I hadn't seen her in months, not since she buried her little boy. Folks whispered she only came into town when duty forced her. Her eyes fell on the bundle in Stone's hands, and she stiffened. "A baby?" she whispered, her voice breaking. She gripped the doorframe like it might hold her upright. Stone glanced back, relief flashing across his face. "Grace, thank God. She needs more than medicine. She needs a mother's touch. Will you help?" Grace's jaw tightened, and for a long, painful stretch, I thought she'd turn and walk out. I wouldn't have blamed her. Losing a child carved a hole that nothing could fill, and I knew she'd been swallowed by that same darkness I lived in. But then the baby whimpered, a thin, broken sound, and Grace's face cracked like a dam giving way. She crossed the room, slow, trembling, and took the baby into her arms. My gut clenched as I watched. I hadn't realized how desperate I was until that moment, watching her cradle the child, gentle but unsure, like she was terrified her own grief might poison the girl. The baby fussed, restless at first, but then, like magic, her cries softened. Her tiny fingers reached up and brushed Grace's collar, and just like that, her breathing steadied. She went quiet, resting against Grace as if she'd known her all along. Grace gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh God, she's so small." She rocked gently, eyes locked on the child, though her lips trembled like the weight of it might shatter her. "What happened?" I swallowed hard, my voice rough. "Found her in a sack, float in the creek. Someone wanted her gone." Grace looked up sharply, horror burning through her grief. She clutched the baby tighter, like she'd shield her from the whole rotten world. Then her gaze met mine, and for the first time I saw something alive in her eyes again. Not just sorrow. "Fire. I'll help," she whispered. Her voice was cracked but steady. "It'll hurt, but I can't turn away." Stone nodded, satisfied, and went back to mixing something at his table. I leaned against the wall, chest heaving, trying to swallow the storm inside me. My hands were shaking so bad I shoved them into my pockets. For years I'd been living half dead, afraid to feel anything. And now here was this fragile little life, pulling Grace back from the grave of her own loss, and dragging me right with her. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe it was foolish. But watching that baby rest in Grace Harper's arms, I felt it clear as day. We were both already bound to her, whether we'd asked for it or not. The next few days blurred like heat over a wagon road. I slept in a chair with my boots on, waking to every hitch of her breath. Grace took the night watches when my eyes failed me, and I took them when her hands started to shake from holding too long. Doc Stone showed us how to warm goat's milk, how to test it on the inside of a wrist, how to burp a creature no heavier than a sack of flour and twice as fragile. I'd broken horses and pulled calves in blizzards, but this was a trail I'd never ridden. When the fever threats passed, and her color pinked, we dared to breathe. The first time she latched to the bottle without fuss, I laughed out loud. The sound startled me. Grace's head snapped up, and for half a heartbeat we just stared at each other like two folks who'd been lost in separate deserts and found the same creek. Then she smiled. It wasn't wide, just a flicker across a tired face, but it hit me square. We set a box by the stove and lined it with flannel. Grace tucked a little scrap of blue ribbon inside, so she knows she's loved. I didn't argue. We fed her in turns, counted breaths, and learned her small language, those squeaks and snorts and sighs that told us what she needed better than words ever could. Sometimes when she slept, Grace would sing under her breath, the same hymn over and over in a voice rough from disuse. I pretended to busy myself with kindling and coffee, but really I stood there listening, feeling the ache stretch and soften in my chest. On the third morning, Doc said, "She'll make it." He was writing something at his desk, not looking at us, like he knew if he met my eyes it'd split me wide open. I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I took off my hat and pressed it to my heart. Grace bent and kissed the baby's forehead, and I had to look away. What do we call her? Grace asked later, when the light through the window fell soft as butter. I opened my mouth and shut it again. Names had weight. Names were promises. She saved me the trouble. Hope, she whispered. Seemed right. Hope, I repeated, testing it in my mouth like a prayer said years too late. The child scrunched her nose as if she'd heard and approved. That's how it stuck. Asterisk. We didn't talk much about the creek. Not at first. The thought of the sack, the rope, the water closing over tiny lungs. There was a fire in that memory I couldn't step through without blistering. But grief doesn't like being ignored. It circles and circles until it finds a door. One night after closing time at the doctor's, with the lamp throwing a warm circle over the desk, Grace told me about the fever that took her boy. She'd washed him with vinegar and begged God till her throat bled, but the world stayed deaf. When she finished, she looked at me square and said, "Your turn." I told her about the cough that wouldn't quit, how my wife coughed herself thin as paper, and our boy faded like smoke. I told her about the 2 graves I dug in hard ground, and the way silence has a taste if you let it sit long enough. I didn't. My tears came out as salt on my tongue and ragged edges on my words. She didn't reach for me, and I didn't reach for her. We just sat inside the truth, like 2 people who'd finally admitted they were cold and in need of fire. Word got around town that I'd hauled a baby out of the creek. Old Mrs. Bell from the Mercantile sent knit booties the size of walnuts. The preacher left a note on Doc's step about God's mysterious rivers. I burned that one in the stove without reading it twice. A couple of ranch hands brought goat milk and advice I didn't need. Sheriff Williams tipped his hat in that slow way of his, eyes measuring, and said, "You done a good thing, Mason." Maybe so, but good things have a way of drawing shadows. I felt them at the edges the way a man feels weather shift in his bones. Still, when Hope's fingers curled around mine, the world got quiet, and all I could hear was the small sound of her breath. In, out, a promise kept 1 second at a time. That evening, after Grace laid Hope in her box, she didn't leave right away. She stood by the door, fingers worrying the hem of her sleeve. "We'll keep her safe," she said at last, not a question. "We will," I answered. The words felt like a vow carved into wood. I didn't know yet what it'd cost. I only knew I'd pay it. Asterisk, the peace didn't last. Trouble never does in a town where power's got more weight than truth. It was Sheriff Williams who first brought the news. He came by Doc Stone's office one morning, dust still on his boots from a hard ride. He touched his hat to Grace, glanced at the baby in her arms, and then fixed his eyes on me. "Mason, somebody's a-skin questions. Word is there's a reward out of $1,000 for a missing baby girl." My gut twisted. I didn't have 1,000 cents to my name, but it wasn't the money that chilled me. It was the thought of someone out there claiming her like a lost cow, like she was property. Grace's arms tightened around Hope, and her face went pale as milk. That same night, after the town lamps went dim, a knock rattled Doc's back door. I opened it ready to run off a drunk, but found Maria, the housemaid from the mayor's mansion, standing there, bonnet pulled low, eyes darting like a spooked moray. She stepped inside quick, voice trembling. "I saw her," she whispered, pointing at Hope. "That's Rebecca's baby." "The mayor's daughter," Grace gasped. I just stared. Maria wrung her hands till her knuckles cracked. "Mr. Thornton. He lied. Told Rebecca the child was stillborn. Ordered me to get rid of her. I couldn't. I gave her to a man, told him to take her far away, but he must have." Her words broke, and she sank onto a chair, shaking. The room spun. My stomach burned hot with rage. Thornton, our mayor, the man who shook hands after church and spoke about family values, had tossed his own blood into a sack and sent her downstream like trash. Grace sat beside Maria, gripping her hand. Does Rebecca know? Maria shook her head. She thinks her baby's buried in the churchyard. She weeps every night. If she ever knew... Her eyes darted toward the door. If Mr. Thornton finds out you've got her, he'll take her. He has money, lawyers, power. He'll bury you both. I looked at Grace, at the baby dozing in her arms. My grief and fury tangled into something sharp. I'd lost too much to watch another innocent slip into the hands of a man like Thornton. When Maria left, Grace turned to me, eyes wide with fear and fire both. Mason, what do we do? I didn't hesitate. We keep her safe. Thornton's not getting near her. Not now. Not ever. Grace studied me a long moment, then nodded. Not ever, she echoed, her voice steady as iron. We moved Hope's box into the back bedroom that night, boarded the window, and took turns sitting guard. Every sound outside hoofbeats, laughter from the saloon, even the wind set my hand drifting to the rifle leaned by the wall. Still, I wasn't blind. Thornton wasn't a man who let go of control easy. If he sent out word with a reward, it meant he already suspected, which meant the storm was coming. I brushed Hope's cheek with a fingertip as she slept, her breath warm against my skin. You ain't going back to that house, I swore in a whisper. I don't care if he's mayor or the damn governor. You're ours now? And in that moment, with Grace watching me through the lamplight, I knew I'd fight the whole world if it meant keeping that promise. Asterisk, it happened faster than I figured. Thornton didn't send whispers. He came himself, a black carriage in Doc Stone's alley. The mayor stepped down with his silver watch chain. A young woman trailed him, veil low. I knew. Rebecca Thornton. I stood in the doorway, rifle visible, but not raised. Grace had Hope in the back room. Doc Stone planted himself like a door. Thornton peeled off his gloves. Mr. Reed, he said with a banker's smile, you possess something that belongs to my family. A child ain't a deed, I said, and she don't belong to you. Rebecca held a locket. When she lifted her veil, her eyes were red-haunted, not hard. Thornton flicked 2 fingers. A lawyer unrolled a paper. Writ of custody, he said. Surrender the infant to her mother, Miss Rebecca Thornton. Doc snorted. You're fond of papers that say what you want. From the back came the sound that owns me, now a fretful hiccup. Grace murmured to Hope. The baby's cry rose, scared by strangers. Grace stepped into the doorway. Hope took one look and burrowed into Grace's neck, fists tight in her collar. Mama, she sobbed. The room went still. Rebecca swayed. Thornton's jaw creaked. That's enough, he snapped. Take the child. The lawyers hesitated, learning the difference between ink and iron. I inched the rifle and watched courage drain out of them. Rebecca's voice shook. Papa, you told me. The rest stuck like a fishbone. She looked at Grace with reverence that hurt to see. She called you. She knows who keeps her safe, Grace said. Thornton snapped his watch shut. Judge Parker will hear this Friday. 3 days. Dallas counsel is retained. Defy the ruling and you'll greet sundown from a cell. He left. The carriage rattled away. Rebecca lingered. Feet rooted like truth rose through the floorboards. Does she stopped. One word remained. Hope. Hope, Grace answered. Something loosened in Rebecca's shoulders. She pressed the locket to her mouth and walked into daylight like a woman returning to a locked room. When they were gone, my knees remembered how to shake. Grace sat, holding Hope as if sunlight could steal her. I set the rifle on the table and kept my hands there till they quit trembling. 3 days, I said. 3 days, Grace echoed. We moved like folks who know weather. Stone drafted statements. Maria crept in after dark and swore the mayor called the child dead and ordered her disposed of. Mrs. Bell signed that he'd spat careless girl at Rebecca and spoke of shame. Sheriff Williams, cautious as ever, pledged the churchyard held no infant by that name. Hope slept through depositions and whispers, the only calm creature in a house bent around fear. That night I sat on the floor beside her, flannel-lined box and counted breaths until they steadied mine. Grace's hand drifted to my hair, then snatched back like she'd touched a brand. We pretended not to notice. There wasn't room for anything but the fight ahead. I couldn't pray, so I made a promise. If the law can't see what's right, I whispered to the boards, to the fire, to the child who changed the tilt of my world, then I'll make it see. The courthouse smelled of pine dust and sweat, packed shoulder to shoulder. Every bench filled, men leaning in the aisles, women fanning themselves though the day wasn't hot. I'd never seen the town so quiet. Up front sat Judge Parker, stern but fair, his gavel resting easy on the desk like a rifle stock waiting to be lifted. Thornton strode in first, chest puffed, Dallas Lawyer at his side, sharp suit and sharper tongue. Rebecca followed a step behind, veil down, eyes hidden. I carried Hope myself, blanket wrapped tight, Grace close at my shoulder. The murmur in. The room softened to a hush when the child fussed against my chest. The lawyer rose first. This is simple. The infant is of Thornton blood, daughter of Rebecca Thornton. Law states she belongs with her rightful mother. End of matter. He spoke like the town was a nuisance he had to swat before supper. Parker nodded. Mr. Reed, Miss Harper, you may speak. My throat closed, but I forced it open. Judge, I found her in Miller's Creek, in a sack. Somebody wanted her gone. She wasn't with her mother, she was left to die. That's the truth. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I pressed Hope closer so the whole room saw her tiny hand grip my shirt. She ain't property. She's breathin' because we kept her so. Gasps rippled. Thornton's face purpled. The lawyer barked in objection, but Parker waved him quiet. Then Grace stood. She didn't tremble. Judge, I lost a child once. I know what it is to bury your heart. But this little girl, she knows us. She cries for us. She sleeps in our arms. She called me Mama. Grace's eyes shone, hard and bright. That word isn't bought, it's earned. Rebecca lifted her veil. Her face was wet, lips trembling. The lawyer stiffened, but she spoke anyway. Judge, my father told me she was dead. He took her from me, said it was for my own good. I believed him. God help me, I believed. Her voice shook the rafters. If this man and woman have given her love, then I can't rip that away. I just want her happy. The room erupted, whispers, gasps, someone cursing under their breath. Thornton slammed his palm on the table. Lies, she's confused. Judge Parker's gavel cracked down. Order. His eyes cut through Thornton like steel. Grace stepped forward, chin high. Your Honor, I have proof of Mr. Thornton's cruelty. Maria, his housemaid, will swear he ordered the child disposed of. Others will testify he declared the infant dead when she lived. A silence spread heavy as thunder. Thornton's lawyer opened his mouth, but shut it when Parker glared. Then, as if heaven itself staged it, Hope stirred in my arms, blinked at the crowded room, and said clear as bells, Mama, Papa. Her tiny voice carried to the rafters. The crowd gasped. Some women wept. Men nodded slow, as if the child herself had spoken judgment. My knees buckled under the weight of it. Grace's hand found mine where it held Hope, and for once I didn't pull away. Thornton roared, "This is madness." But even he heard how hollow it sounded. Judge Parker leaned back, stroking his beard, gaze heavy on me, on Grace, then on Rebecca. The whole town waited on his next breath, the scales of law straining between blood and love. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just a child's life on trial. It was ours, too. Judge Parker didn't hurry. He leaned forward with his elbows. On the bench, hands tented like a man warming them over a small, necessary fire. Law is meant to protect the helpless, he said, voice steady enough to quiet the rafters. Sometimes blood does that best. Sometimes it doesn't. He looked. At me, at Grace, then at Rebecca. And sometimes men who talk loud about family forget what the word means. Thornton's lawyer started to rise. Parker's gavel tapped once gentle, final. I've heard enough. He turned a page. Testimony shows the infant was abandoned. To death, Maria Alvarez swears the order came from Mayor Thornton. Sheriff confirms no burial was recorded. The mother his gaze found Rebecca was deceived. He let the words settle like dust after a stampede. Given all that, any claim of custody by Mr. Thornton is void. As to Miss Rebecca Thornton, she stood before he called her. "Judge," she said, hands shaking, "I was weak. I believed him. I don't deserve her, but I want her safe." Her eyes moved to Grace, and then to me, cradling the child. They made her breathe. Parker nodded once, like a man who'd been waiting on truth to speak for itself. "Then I rule as follows. The child known here as Hope remains with Mason Reed and Grace Harper as legal guardians and custodians. Miss Rebecca Thornton may petition for visitation by consent of the guardians at times and terms that serve the child." He lifted his eyes to the room. "This bench recognizes the family that love built." The sound that followed wasn't a cheer. Not quite. It was more like a long breath the whole town had been holding and could finally let go. A woman sobbed. A man said "thank God" under his breath. Grace's fingers crushed mine till our bones clicked, and Hope, startled, popped her head up and blinked, then laid her cheek on my chest as if the gavel had patted her to sleep. Thornton exploded. He surged to his feet, face gone the color of raw liver. "You'll regret this," he roared at Parker, spittle bright on his lip. "I'll strip this town plank by plank." He didn't get to finish. Sheriff Williams moved with a slow certainty of weather, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Sit down, Mr. Mayor," he said, "or follow me out for a conversation about attempted infanticide, perjury, and whatever else rattles loose when we pry up the floorboards." For a heartbeat, Thornton fought. Then he saw the room. Men not looking away, women who'd buried children and would not forgive what he'd done. The fight ran out of him like whiskey off a table. He sagged back into the bench, staring at a future that had stopped obeying him. Rebecca approached us like a person stepping onto a rope bridge, slow breath held. She reached for Hope, then drew back, afraid to take even that. "May I—" She didn't finish. Grace angled the child toward her. Hope regarded the stranger with the solemn interest babies give the world, then reached for the locket on Rebecca's throat. Rebecca let out a sound that wasn't laughter or crying, but something stitched from both. "Hello, little one," she whispered. I'm Rebecca." Grace looked at me, asking without words. I heard my own voice answer, rough but clear. "If you want her in your life, you can be Aunt Rebecca." Rebecca's eyes shut like a prayer had just found its words. "Aunt," she breathed, "I can be that." People filtered out, quiet, respectful, like church after an honest sermon. Doc Stone shook my hand with both of his. Mrs. Bell pressed. A bag of lemon drops into Grace's palm, like victory required sweets. Sheriff tipped his hat to the child. Even Judge Parker, stepping down, paused to glance our way. He didn't smile exactly, but something around his eyes eased, the look of a man who'd done the hard right and would sleep for it. When the room finally emptied, the three of us stood there, the life we'd chosen circling our feet like a coil of rope. The gavel's echo was still in the wood. Grace touched Hope's hair. Rebecca touched Hope's foot. I touched the old ache in my chest and found it softer, like a scar that had stopped itching. Outside, the afternoon was clean and bright. Folks didn't look at Thornton as he lurched down the steps. A man can die a little while standing. Someone said the word recall. Someone else muttered jail. I didn't spare him another thought. We walked home slow, not hurrying the miracle. Hope slept between us, heavy with trust. Whatever storms were left in this world, I knew we'd meet them shoulder to shoulder. 6 months passed like a river smoothing stone. Thornton lost his office before autumn. The town held its own judgment, quicker than Parker's. Some said he fled south. Others swore they saw him drunk in Dallas, shouting at ghosts. Either way, his shadow didn't reach us anymore. Hope thrived. Her cheeks grew round, her steps sure, her laugh a lasso that caught every heart within earshot. By July, she could toddle from chair to chair, squealing, "Mama, Papa," like it was her favorite game. Every time she said it, Grace's eyes shone with a light I thought I'd never see again. The townsfolk wanted celebration, not whispers, so we gave it to them. On a warm evening, when the prairie smelled of cut hay and wildflowers, we stood before the church. Grace wore a simple calico dress, hair unbound for once, golden in the light. I wore my one good coat, patched at the elbow, but she smiled at me like it was fine silk. Judge Parker himself stood to marry us, said he owed the town at least that Dot Hope was Flower Girl, though most of the petals wound up in her mouth or scattered behind her. Folks laughed, not cruel, but soft, the way laughter sounds when it's rooted in relief. Rebecca stood near the front, veil gone, locket gleaming, her smile. Sad but steady. She'd come often, always gentle, always content to be Aunt Rebecca. I think she found a kind of healing in it. When the vows were spoken, I nearly stumbled. The words, for better or worse, carried weight I knew too well. But Grace's hand squeezed mine, and for once the worst didn't scare me. Not with her, beside me. Not with Hope's small fingers tugging my coat, demanding my attention even as I swore myself whole. The town feasted afterward, pies and roast, fiddles singing, boots pounding, dust. I remember holding Hope high above my shoulders as the stars came out, her laughter carrying farther than any fiddle tune. For the first time in years I felt like a man alive, not just surviving. Later, when the lanterns burned low and neighbors drifted home, Grace and I sat on the porch steps. Hope slept between us, her curls damp with sweat from play, her little hand clutching Grace's ribbon scrap. Coyotes yipped in the far hills, but close by there was only peace. Grace leaned her head on my shoulder. "We made a family out of ashes," she whispered. I kissed the crown of her hair, rough voice breaking. "No, out of hope." And that's how we sat, three souls, stitched together by loss, love, and a river's cruel mercy, watching the prairie night spread wide. Before us, not chosen by blood, but chosen by choice, by love, by the will to begin again.